Anyway, though, guys, we are going to talk about that right now with Matt Boyle from Breitbart. Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Matt, my first question for you, and I know you wrote a column on this, top conservative lawmakers in the U.S. House of Representatives are launching a legislative blitz against Democrat President Joe Biden, exposing his weakness when it comes to the threat of the Chinese Communist Party. My first question, Matt, has to be, can you explain to people what you mean by legislative blitz for my listeners?
Yeah, so Congressman Jim Banks, who's the chairman of the Republican Study Committee, which is the biggest group of conservative lawmakers in the House of Representatives, it's almost all of the Republican conference. They came out with a flurry of a dozen lawmakers have introduced 17 separate pieces of legislation this week designed to try to highlight the weaknesses that exist in the Biden foreign policy as it relates to the Chinese Communist Party and try to re-implement several of the things that President Trump had in place to check and counter the CCP's rise on the world stage on an economic, a military front, on a human rights front, and so on and so forth. Joe Biden has, in his first month as president, this is the other thing that they released. The Republican Study Committee released a 6-page report, and I think it's required reading for every concerned American out there across the country. It's linked in our story. People can go download the 6-page report and read it for themselves, but it goes through actions that Joe Biden has taken in his first month as president already. So he's been president for just over 4 weeks in a day, so a little over a month. Joe Biden has already significantly empowered, literally on his second day in office, was doing all sorts of different executive actions, empowering the Chinese Communist Party and weakening the United States. Meanwhile, installing people throughout his administration, everybody from Secretary of State Tony Blinken to Secretary of Defense General Lloyd Austin to his National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan to his UN envoy, Linda Thomas Greenfield, who's yet to be confirmed by the Senate, but is the nominee to serve as the UN ambassador or the United States ambassador to the United Nations, all of whom have either taken money from the Chinese Communist Party, have given out speeches at things like the Confucius Institutes, have had business ties with them. I mean, what we see here in the at the outside of the Biden administration is that the United States government, from the State Department to the CIA to the Defense Department to the White House and everywhere, and also the Treasury and Commerce Department, are hopelessly compromised by the Chinese Communist Party and their interests. It is particularly dangerous what we are learning about the Biden administration. In this 6-page report by the Republican Study Committee, along with the 17 bills that these Republican members of Congress have introduced, aim to expose that and try to force the issues out there into the public mindset. Look, the Republicans, we live in the real world here. The Democrats have the majority in the House. They have the majority in the Senate, and they've got the White House. So there's only so much that Republicans can do. But what they are doing is exposing this stuff and taking it to the American people so that hopefully in 2 years when the midterm elections come along, and then in 4 years when the next presidential election comes along, we can fix this mistake that happened and end this error of Joe Biden and Democrat complete control in Washington. And the way you do that is you take the information to the American people and you show them. You don't tell them. You show them that what Biden's doing in his actions. And the other thing that's really important is Psaki there, that clip you played about her talking about the conversation that Joe Biden had with Xi Jinping. It demonstrates that they're saying all the right things, right? The rhetoric all sounds good and everything, but then when it comes to actual actions, they're not following through on this. And you've heard
Matt,
from Biden himself.
Can I interrupt you for a sec here? Because when I heard Biden's answer, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on all of this, I followed how Biden stands on it. 1 minute he says China's going to eat our lunch. The next minute he says they're not going to eat our lunch. He's very inconsistent in that way. But when I heard his response about China during the town hall on, I believe it was Tuesday night, I was kind of blown away, and I want to play it for everybody here. I was blown away with how obvious it seemed that he was just becoming a patsy. Like, I knew that was going to happen, but it was very transparent that he wasn't going to push back on the Chinese government at all. I'm going to play you this cut and get your reaction.
And so the idea, I'm not going to speak out against what he's doing in Hong Kong, what he's doing with the Uyghurs in western mountains of China, and Taiwan trying to end the one China policy by making it forceful. I said, and by the way, he said he gets it. Culturally, there are different norms at each country, and their leaders are expected to follow.
Matt, what do you think about that? Culturally, there are different norms. It reminds me of when Pelosi said about Ilhan Omar, she has a different experience in the use of words. It's kind of excusing bad behavior.
So what Joe Biden's doing here is he's demonstrating that what he's going to continue to do is just say all the right things, right? Like, he's going to offer the right rhetoric out there. He's going to say this stuff in the calls, but then he's also revealing that he's just going through the motions. He doesn't intend to back any of it up with actual actions. And at the same time, he's also rationalizing and explaining away what Xi Jinping is doing, engaged in atrocities. He's in saying that it's explaining that, oh, well, that's okay because it's okay in their culture. Well, it's not okay. It's not okay to go engage in systemic elimination of an entire race or an entire ethnicity. That's not acceptable. And Joe Biden needs to stop rationalizing the Chinese Communist Party's efforts to eliminate an entire population of people. That's what they're doing with these Uyghur camps, and Joe Biden is in league with them on this. And again, the American people need to know. They need to read this report from the Republican Study Committee because it goes through in great detail how everybody from Joe Biden himself, from executive actions that he signed, through different things that his cabinet members and cabinet nominees have done and said and promised during the beginning of this administration in just the first few weeks, has empowered America's greatest adversary and undermined the United States on the world stage, hurting American workers. This is not a game. This is not politics. This is serious stuff. And these are bad people over in Beijing. They are bad people who want to take over the world. That is the way Beijing sees it. They see it as they are the center of the world and that they will supplant the United States as the world superpower, as the sole world superpower, which the United States has been since the fall of the wall and the end of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, after Ronald Reagan's, Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall speech, right? So
right.
Since then, the United States has been the sole world superpower. But in the early 1990s, the Chinese Communist Party set out a plan that they've been following through on for decades now, and that they are very, very close to. And they probably would have already been there had Hillary Clinton won the election in 2016. If Donald Trump and Secretary Pompeo and Vice President Pence weren't able to do the things that they did in the last 4 years to counter and check the Chinese with tariffs, with various other policies, military efforts. Another big story that's worth tracking is what Biden's doing with the seaways in the South China Sea and in the Taiwan Strait. But what Biden is doing is a wholesale surrender to the Chinese Communist Party, and he's bowing down before Xi Jinping and rationalizing away what he's trying to do to take over the world. And again, the only way to stop this is for the American people to elect a House Republican majority and a Senate Republican majority in 2022, and then elect a new Republican president in 2024. Because in the meantime, to see the Republicans continue to expose these actions that Biden's engaged in of subversion of the United States in efforts to empower our greatest adversary.
Now, Matt, I saw reports today that Biden had already called a lid because of the weather. I don't know what the weather is in D.C. I'm assuming it's snow. But he's already kind of taking the slide today. And, there's reports out that he's playing Mario Kart. He's stoking a fire, all these things. And then in the meantime, we hear that Kamala Harris, the vice president, is taking major calls with heads of states. And like you said, we're only about 4 weeks into this administration. Does that scare you a little bit that as bad as Biden is, I don't feel much better about Kamala taking these big calls?
I don't like Kamala Harris taking these calls. It is a job of the vice president, however, to take calls from foreign leaders. So it's not that outside the normal. And Biden has talked to several of these world leaders that she's talking to as well. But it is a normal kind of one of the duties of the vice president. So I wouldn't read too far into that. I do think, though, however, that Biden is asleep at the switch. He's not delivering on solving all of these problems. Look, we're a month into his administration. 100,000 people have already died from coronavirus on Joe Biden's watch. What happened to the media keeping track of that? I don't know. Did they take their counters down off of CNN and MSNBC? But the thing is that they still have zero legislative accomplishments. They've only got a little bit of their cabinet together. Put into place. The cabinet members that they do have and the nominees that they've put forward, again, as we laid out here, are hopelessly compromised by the Chinese Communist Party and financial interests of CCP-backed state-backed enterprises and institutions like the Confucius Institutes and various other companies, among many, many other serious deep flaws with the Biden administration. Meanwhile, Texas is having serious weather problems today. There are serious problems all around the country. There's power problems down in Texas. Where's Joe Biden? Why isn't he solving these problems? Why is he hiding in the basement? Again, you cannot run the White House from the basement. You need to be out there front and center and solving problems for the country. He's not doing that.
There's a lot of stories that he's early to bed. So it is 1:45. Who knows? Who knows what early means in the Biden administration?
We don't know. We don't really know that much. And the media is asleep at the switch, too. They're not doing their jobs. There have been a handful of reporters in that White House briefing room that ask a series of sometimes decent questions, but for the most part, the media's not doing their job. The Biden administration's not doing their job. The Democrats in Congress are not doing their job. And guess who pays the price? The American worker.
Absolutely.
The American worker are the ones who pay the price when this happens. And so that's the ultimate thing here is the American people can course correct this in 2 years and in 4 years, and they can end this error if they get going right now.
Matt Boyle, everyone should check out his stuff on Breitbart. I thank you so much for being with us, Matt. You're always an expert on all things China, on all things the Biden administration, the Biden crime family, the Biden Five, whatever you want to call them. We thank you for joining the show. We hope you'll join us again soon. Guys, I have great news for my listeners. The Gen 40 heater is back and just in time for this really, really cold time of year. We're in the stretch right now. This is the really hard part of winter where it kind of feels like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. But there is. And that light is the Gen 40 heater. Because even though you feel cold and you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to have to heat up this whole house. It's going to cost me all of this money. It's not. Because this heater, you plug it in, and it heats up right where you are. So you're not heating the entire house. You're heating where you're sitting. Maybe Taylor's having a nice glass of scotch in front of the TV in the living room. He doesn't need to have the whole house heated up.
No, absolutely not. It's just that one room that you're in. You can take it with you whatever room you're going into. I visited my parents' house a couple of weekends ago. My father told me, he says, we've been using the Eden Pure Gen 40 heater for years, some version of it. I said, I didn't know that. He said, yeah, remember that portable heater I had when you were growing up? That was an Eden Pure. I said, no way. So it's been in the family for generations.
It's a family tradition.
That's right. That's
Maybe
right.
Someday Harrison will pass that on. That's Taylor's son. He'll buy a Gen 40 for his son. Wow, that's amazing. But guys, if you want to check out the Eden Pure Gen 40 heater, it will pay for itself in a matter of weeks. This is the best part. It saves you money. That's what we're all trying to get at the end of the day. We're trying to stay warm and save money, and this does both. Go to EdenPure.com and put in code word HowieDeal to get $50 off the sale price. That's EdenPure.com and use code word HowieDeal for an extra $50 off. These heaters are in high demand, so go right now to EdenPure.com. We're going to open up the phone lines, and we're going to talk in this next segment about school openings. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of people in the Biden administration who can't seem to get their talking points right. They're all over the map. We're going to play you some of that sound. What do you think? Are schools going to open up in May like Joe Biden says? Are they going to be open in the summer? Are they going to be open next fall? Next Christmas? Where does it end? 844-500-4242. We'll be right back. This is The Grace Curley Show.
The Grace Curley Show will be right back.